Hello, everyone. Here we go. So today we're going to be taking a look at the engine block, okay, and the pieces that are associated with that. So the engine block is kind of the core of the whole engine. They are typically made out of either cast aluminum, which is very popular these days. Older or larger engines may be also made out of cast steel. And then typically they are machined down to precision. So casting is a process where we liquefy metal and we pour it into some kind of a mold. And then machining is when we're using cutting bits to come in then and very precisely and cleanly create certain parts. So, for example, we may cast the entire body, but then we would come in and machine out the bearing for the crankshaft, the cylinder hole, certainly the areas for the valves, the faces of the oil crankcase as well, and a lot of other parts. Okay, so casting gets it done quick, and then machining then kind of finishes it off very precisely. Okay. So one major role of the engine block is really just to kind of house and encase all of the engine body parts. So it houses the cylinder, it's got all of our gearing, it's got the piston in there, we've got oil in the crankcase, we've got really all of our other internal parts are all kind of stored in there. Okay, so it's got to hold all those parts in place so that they can move and do their jobs. It also is going to hold oil. So this is what we call the crankcase, this area down here. It usually has a cover that seals up this side. There is a gasket that usually sits in the middle, or if you're seeing some blue stuff, then you might have a liquid gasket maker, meaning that someone replaced the old gasket with like a spreadable replacement. Okay, but we need that oil to stay in there so that all the parts can get lubricated and nothing's going to overheat and break on us. Okay. Another major role of the engine block is it has to hold all of the combustion forces. So inside the actual cylinder, remember, inside here is where the explosion is taking place. So we've got fuel, we've got heat, we've got a lot of extreme force. Okay, as that piston is being forced down and it's doing the job. You think about if you're riding on your go-kart or a dirt bike or something like that. I mean, it's got to be a powerful enough explosion to move the whole machine plus you and turn the wheels and do it in a fast enough rate that actually gets us where we want to go. So we're talking about a lot of force there. Okay. So another thing that the engine has to do is really be able to contain all those forces and force them in the right direction so that, again, things don't break and we actually get power where we want it. Okay. So that's a major job. Another major part of the engine block are the bearings or the bushings or guides for moving all the other parts. So I pointed out a few before. Again, we do have the cylinder where the piston is going to be moving up and down. We have a main bearing or bushing here, okay, for the crankshaft. And then we also have some of the spots. This is like an oil drain. This is for the camshaft, which has to do with engine timing. Again, we also have spots for the valves, and not seen from this side, but we also have spots for the springs. Okay. So all those are moving pieces, and they all have to move very precisely. And so all of those parts are also part of the engine block. Okay. So a couple of different roles there. So also associated with the engine block is the engine head or the head of the engine. Okay. This particular engine is what we call an L style or flat top engine. Okay. So it has a flat top. Other styles would be the overhead valve setup. So people, if you have overhead valves, you probably had a much larger cylinder head than this. In fact, it would be, about yay thick comparatively because the valves are in the upper part here, not in the engine block. And so we needed a thicker area to kind of take care of that. If you're unsure if you had overhead valves, you probably have a cover. It probably has a stamp on it that says OHV, which stands for overhead valves. That's usually a pretty good indicator. If you don't see that kind of a cover or stamp, then you probably do not. Okay. So some jobs of the head of the engine. Okay. The first role, which is not really listed here, is really just to cover the engine up. It is the spot that goes on top of the cylinder, so it also has to withstand all those explosion forces. Okay. It also features some cooling fins. So again, our engines are air cooled. So these fins really just stick up, and their job is just to allow air to pass kind of between the fins. So heat radiates through the metal, and as we get cold air in between, that cold air pulls away the heat and brings it somewhere else. And that process kind of continues as cold air keeps moving around. Hopefully, air movement being provided by the flywheel, which we talked about in the last one, So we always have fresh air coming through. Okay. We can also see that the spark plug is housed in this one here. Okay. And that's because we want the spark plug right above the cylinder so we can ignite the fuel at the point of entry. The engine head here also has spots for all of the cap bolts. So these are probably the strongest and most important bolts on the engine. Again, because of the force that's happening on the inside of the engine, we got to make sure this thing is really bolted on tight and it can withstand the extreme forces that are going to be put upon it and it doesn't break or come off. Okay. And then finally, down here in the picture, we also see what's known as the head gasket. So this is the most important gasket in the engine. Again, it has to withstand all of the heat and explosions and forces that are happening inside the engine block. And so it has to be just as strong as the other parts. So gaskets in general, for those of you who don't know, is basically a piece that goes between two metal objects. So when we have two metal flat objects, okay, even though they have probably been machined, and they're very, very precise. Nothing that's made by humans is perfect, okay? There's always going to be some variation. The face is not going to be 100% flat in all areas that it could be. And what that means for us is there's a possible area for a leak to take place, okay? And I think we discussed already in class that leaks in our engine are bad. That means we're going to lose power or the engine's not going to function properly, okay? So the gasket is kind of like, like a glue sheet that goes in between these two parts. And basically, it makes sure that it gets in between and seals up any of the gaps that might be occurring when two metal parts are touching like that. And the gasket in particular is made out of like a soft metal foil. It kind of feels like lead or something like that. And it just allows it so that when we put pressure on it, actually will squeeze down and kind of mushes into all the places that we need to. Okay. You'll find other gaskets throughout the engine, but most of those are going to be rubber or paper. They just don't have to be quite as strong as the head gasket. Okay. When you do take this one off, you want to take good care to put this in a safe spot, somewhere flat. Don't stick it in your can or someplace else. If it gets bent and kind of gummed up, then it's just not going to go back on, and you won't be able to really reuse that head gasket. And they are not they're not easy to replace. You usually have to buy a new one. There's typically not a kind of liquid remake for the head gasket. Okay.